You won't see them on your screens. They don't give interviews. They don't participate in elections. But they are the ones who decide who becomes president, where the next war will start, and what words will disappear from your news. Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Soros. These are not just names. They are mechanisms of power that operate outside the law. In this video, we will reveal how the system that controls the world works. From the shadows, without a mandate, but with absolute power. Welcome to the backstage of global control. They don't flash across the news. Their names aren't discussed on talk shows. They never run for president or give interviews. But when it comes to starting a war, crashing a currency, rigging an election, or introducing independent regulation, they are already at the negotiating table, and often at the head of it. These people are called by many names: globalists, puppet masters, the elite. But there is another, more accurate name for them: gray cardinals. This is not just a hackneyed expression. It accurately describes their position: the shadow behind the throne, the advisor, the conductor of the orchestra. These figures do not shine in the media, but behind them stand centuries of power, hundreds of billions of capital, and a delicate web of influence that envelops the entire world. Who are they? How did they live? How did they come to rule the planet? How do they maintain control without even appearing in public? The answer to this question is not just a biography of a few names. It is a story about how shadow power works. Power that has no flag, but holds the keys to the most guarded doors in the world. Let's start with the most important thing. Money is not a goal. It is a tool. The real power brokers crossed the line where wealth is measured in numbers long ago. For them, wealth is a way to act without limits. When you control the largest banks, investment funds, pharmaceutical companies, oil corporations, and universities, you don't need to win elections. All you need to do is maintain the illusion of choice for others. This rule has been mastered by dynasties whose names have become symbols of secret rule: the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and Soroses. Each of these names is like a separate chapter in the history of not just finance, but global governance. These are not oligarchs, magnates, or investors. They are the architects of the systems in which we live. They have no armies, but they start wars. They have no ministries, but they influence laws. They have no territories, but they draw borders. This is a new type of power that arises not from bayonets, but from credit reports and memoranda. It is invisible, but that is precisely where its strength lies. The gray cardinals do not act directly. They create foundations, committees, institutions. They influence curricula, grants, analyst reports, WHO standards, UN agendas. They set the boundaries of what is acceptable. And anything that falls outside these boundaries is declared a conspiracy theory, marginal, or a threat to national security. But this game is not new. It began back in the 18th century, when the first bankers learned to lend money to kings and then dictate terms to them. Since then, the world has changed, but the mechanisms of influence have remained the same. How many of us can explain how the financial system works? Who controls the central banks? Who finances transnational NGOs, and to whom are they accountable? The answers to these questions always lead to the same rooms, where decisions are made behind closed doors, without cameras and without minutes. The Grey Cardinals do not act alone. They are a multi-tritoit network, spread across the world, with branches in governments, corporations, the media, and even academia. This is not a conspiracy in the Hollywood sense. It is a multi-tritoid management structure in which the usual rules do not apply. And if you don't see them yet, it doesn't mean they're not there. It means they're doing their job well. The history of the Rothschild family is the story of how one man managed to create a financial empire spanning an entire continent and pass control of it on to his children so that power would never leave the family. It all began in the late 18th century in Frankfurt am Main, in the Jewish ghetto, where Meyer Amschel Rothschild started out trading coins and jewelry. By the beginning of the 19th century, he was already the personal banker of several German princes. But the real breakthrough came when he sent his 5 sons to different European countries: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and left one in Frankfurt. In this way, the Rothschild family created the world's first international banking network, based on trust, kinship, and encrypted correspondence. When Napoleon started wars across Europe, it was the Rothschilds who found themselves at the center of events. Their communication system, couriers on horseback, agents on ships, a network of informants, allowed them to learn about political changes before official government couriers. Thanks to this, they beat all of London with the news of the victory at Waterloo and played on this on the stock exchange. Legend has it that Nathan Rothschild staged a panic to buy up shares that had collapsed on false news of England's defeat. The Rothschilds financed not only states, but also wars. They lent money to both sides of the conflict on one condition: they were guaranteed interest and repayment in any case. It was at this moment that a paradigm was formed. War is profitable if you finance it from afar. Over time, they became the main support for European monarchies. The British, Austrian, and French crowns all depended on these bankers. Revolutions didn't touch them. They survived regime changes, empires, and even world wars, staying in the shadows but still in control. What is the secret of such longevity? The fact that the Rothschilds always preferred to rule without publicity. They rarely held office. Their names were not heard in Parliament, but they financed those who got there. They did not control decisions. They controlled the opportunities in which decisions were made. The family created dozens of banks, foundations, and investment groups covering the financial flows of all of Europe and part of America. Even today, banks with Rothschild involvement continue to influence key decisions in monetary policy, trade, and energy. Their influence has become so integrated that it is not always easy to identify directly, and most importantly, they have not disappeared. They have simply changed their form of presence. Today, the Rothschild name may not be heard on the screen, but it is woven into the governance of the largest holding companies, into funds that own shares in strategic enterprises, and into the management structures of transnational corporations. This is not just a banking house. It is a parallel power operating outside the system of elections, laws, and accountability. And this is just one family. While the Rothschilds were shaping the financial architecture of Europe, another force emerged in America. Rougher, but no less effective. The Rockefellers. The history of this dynasty begins with John Davison Rockefeller, who in the late 19th century created Standard Oil, the largest oil monopoly in history. At the height of its power, Standard Oil controlled more than 90% of the U.S. oil market. It was not just a company, it was a state structure in private hands. Rockefeller dictated prices, destroyed competitors, bought up railways and banks, creating a vertically integrated empire where every dollar came back to him. When the U.S. government, under public pressure, broke Standard Oil into pieces, the result was 26 companies, many of which still dominate the market today. Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, and all of them remained under the control of the Rockefeller family, simply through a chain of funds, trusts, and cross-ownership. But oil was just the beginning. Real power came when the Rockefellers began investing in healthcare, education, and science. Their foundation financed the creation of the World Health Organization, research institutes, and universities. This allowed them to influence what is taught, what is treated, what is considered normal, and what is considered pathological. They invested in pharmaceuticals. Today, the vast majority of the largest pharmaceutical companies have direct or indirect links to foundations established by the Rockefellers. This gives them informational and regulatory superiority. From patents to recommendations from the Ministry of Health and the WHO. Ideas of global education, sustainable development, environmental standards, and the new economy are all promoted through a network of non-profit organizations, research centers, and universities funded by the same sources. But unlike the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers have actively invested in opinion management. Hundreds of newspapers, television channels, and publishing houses, either directly or through holding companies, fell under their influence. This allowed them to rewrite the agenda, shape public opinion, and impose universal values, behind which lay pragmatic power. The family never severed ties with politicians, from U.S. presidents to senators. John's great-grandson, Nelson Rockefeller, became vice president himself. But the family's key role is not in the spotlight. It is in negotiations, in the office, in the shadow management of processes where there are no cameras. This is how a system is created where politicians are temporary workers and the owners of capital are eternal landlords, where the truth is what sponsored academics say, where the fight against global warming is just a way to redistribute investments, and where it is not the state that is responsible for all this, but a couple of private foundations with tens of billions. This is how power without a flag works. And the Rockefellers are its ideal engineers. The name George Soros is known to everyone. He is accused of color revolutions, currency crashes, and the destruction of traditional values. But who is he really? Just a billionaire philanthropist or entrepreneur? New type of gray cardinal, acting not through families and banks, but through ideology. Born in Budapest in the 1930s, Soros survived the Nazi occupation and later emigrated to the United Kingdom, and then to the United States. There, he became a successful stock market speculator and founded the Quantum Fund, earning hundreds of millions of dollars from currency fluctuations. His famous attack on the British pound in 1992 earned him over $1 billion. And the nickname, the man who broke the Bank of England. But what he did with that money is even more interesting. Soros created the Open Society Foundation, which operates in more than 100 countries and spends billions promoting democracy, human rights, and freedom. But behind this noble facade lies something more: a mechanism for interfering in the politics of countries, and not only developing ones, funding opposition movements, training personnel for regime change, media campaigns, legal support for inconvenient activists. These are all tools used by the Open Society. Its influence can be seen in events in Georgia, Ukraine, Serbia, Hungary, Poland, as well as in Latin America and Africa. The peculiarity of Soros's approach lies in his ideological weaponry. While the Rothschilds controlled finance and the Rockefellers controlled education and science, Soros chose values. He finances LGBT movements, gender studies, the fight for open borders, the decriminalization of drugs, and much more. This creates a powerful cultural shift in which traditional societies lose their footing and a new order emerges under the guise of liberation. Supporters call it progress. Critics call it soft occupation through NGOs. But the result is the same. Power slips away from nations and ends up in the hands of network structures controlled from afar. Soros is not alone in this. He is the pie face of a new type of influence, where armies are replaced by networks and laws by grants and ratings. He cooperates with other foundations, the UN, the European Commission, and private corporations. His goal is not simply influence, but to reshape the world wars into a configuration that suits him. And if the Rothschilds and Rockefellers built an empire of capital, Soros is the Rothschilds. Architect of a new ideological order in which national interests are blurred and supranational structures gain power. This is power without territory, power that is not elected but cannot be abolished. And it is precisely this kind of power that is changing the world faster than any army today. How can you rule states without a mandate, an army, or borders? The answer is simple: through instruments that have no flag. This is the key principle of the Grey Cardinals. Use structures that are not subordinate to any state, but can influence everything. The first of these tools is central banks. Despite the illusion of state ownership, many of them are in fact independent structures run by people who have not been elected by anyone. An example is the U.S. Federal Reserve System. It is a private corporation with a monopoly on printing dollars, whose leadership is not accountable to the President or Congress. Who is behind it? Among the largest owners are the financial families mentioned above. The second tool is rating agencies. Moody's, S&P, Fitch, all of them play the role of trust arbitrators who decide whether a country or company can be trusted. One downgrade and the economy collapses. Who determines the criteria? The same structures that then benefit from the collapse. The third are transnational corporations. Their budgets exceed those of entire countries. Google, Amazon, BlackRock, and Vanguard control not only goods and services, but also information, data, preferences, and capital. Their owners are often the same people through mutual funds, trusts, and family offices. The fourth is non-profit organizations, which operate under the guise of charity, but promote the agenda of their donors. They participate in election campaigns, in the drafting of laws, in the development of education programs, and in the fight against disinformation. And who determines what is disinformation and what is truth? The fifth is CTT, Media Holdings. 5 corporations control more than 80% of the world's information flow. They set the agenda, determine what to talk about and what to ignore. Those who sponsor these media outlets gain a monopoly on reality. And the sixth is the BIT. Expert community. Institutes, think tanks, authoritative scientists, all of them can be funded from the same source. Their conclusions, assessments, and forecasts determine what will be accepted as truth and what will be dismissed as extremism. These tools operate around the world, unhindered by elections, protests, or investigations. They are omnipresent but intangible. They are like air, invisible, but everything depends on them. This is how power is created. Without accountability, but with unlimited influence. And this power is in the hands of those whose names are rarely heard in the news. If you ask yourself why no one stops, investigates, arrests, or imprisons these people, the answer is simple. They are above the system that we consider legitimate, because they created it themselves. When it comes to the influence of gray cardinals, it is important to understand that the rules were not made for them. Laws, international agreements, tax regulations, reporting standards, all of these are created as a showcase for the masses. Behind the scenes, there are exceptions, offshore accounts, immunities, deregulation, and arbitration that are used by the select few. Take, for example, the so-called fight against corruption. It is applied strictly selectively to those who have slipped out of control, violated unspoken agreements, or threatened the system. The real architects of the system are not subject to investigation. Their funds have immunity status. Their trusts are structured in such a way that it is impossible to identify the beneficiaries. Their assets are spread across dozens of jurisdictions where there is no control mechanism. They operate through friends in power, law firms, and global consulting agencies, which, for millions of dollars, find legal ways to circumvent any rule. And if necessary, they will simply rewrite the laws. This is why parliamentary initiatives increasingly contain wording written not by politicians, but by lawyers working for transnational corporations. Add to this control over international structures, the WHO, IMF, World Bank, WTO, UN, all these organizations depend on funding. And funding is in the hands of those who control global capital. They dictate the agenda, the topics for resolutions, the direction of reforms. They determine what is considered progress and what is considered a threat. But the most sophisticated form of power is power through chaos. When the system is so complex that no one can grasp it in its entirety except those who created it. When you don't know who is responsible, because everything is diffused. Shareholders, consultants, managers, independent experts. Thus, the gray cardinals live in a different legal reality. Their assets are not subject to sanctions, their movements are not subject to visa control, and their decisions are not subject to public debate. This is not a secret society. It is a nobility, a structure to which entry is open only by right of capital and kinship. While people argue about what was said in the news, they have already moved the pieces on the chessboard. While we vote, they appoint. While we discuss freedom, they establish algorithms that determine what we will see. That is why no one interferes with them, because the state mechanisms themselves have long been built into their system. And those who try to break it either lose or disappear. Do you think you have a choice? That you participate in politics, influence laws, determine the future of your country? This is an illusion, perhaps the most skillful of all. And it was created by those who want you to feel free, but not be so. In a world of gray cardinals, democracy is a spectacle, needed to legitimize decisions already made behind the scenes. Elections, protests, campaigns, promises. All of this has been turned into a simulacrum where the script is written in advance and the roles are assigned. It is not voters who decide who becomes president, but investors. It is not parties that determine who enters parliament, but sponsors. Who writes the law does not depend on the people, but on the corporations that pay the experts. The illusion of freedom is maintained by digital algorithms that select your news, shape the agenda, and impose preferences on you. You think you are making a choice, but it is a choice from a list compiled for you. And behind that list are the very people whose names are never mentioned on television. The gray cardinals do not need totalitarianism. They do not build concentration camps. They create a world where everyone chooses their own cage, where surveillance is convenience, censorship is the fight against fake news, and control is security, where voluntary submission has become the highest form of slavery. And while we argue with each other, accuse each other of political preferences, and fight over the news, they remain behind the scenes. Because that is how an ideal system of government should work. When those who govern are invisible, and those who are governed do not even suspect that they are being governed. This is the essence of power without a flag. It does not need recognition. It is enough simply not to notice it. And then, it is eternal.